There was submission also from Nzoia Sugar Company, if the director may just speak it, says that appearing before the committee on the 5th November 2013, the managing director of Nzoia Sugar met the following submission, if we may have it to go together. And it says here that, I won't read all the details of the company's history, but it says, NSE provides cane development services, including supply of fertilizer and provision of extension services to outgrowers cane farmers contracted by it. They picked on West Kenya again. They're saying West Kenya was poaching cane from farmers contracted by Nzoia Sugar, Mumias Sugar, and Butali Sugar Factory. West Kenya, there were individuals acting as cane poaching brokers based at various points within Bungoma and Busia counties. NSA sensitizes farmers on obligation of signed contracts with them and other millers and campaigns against cane poaching. In 2008, NSC set an anti-poaching unit comprising of NSC and the Kenya police officers that used to monitor cane poaching. And later, 2010, an ad hoc committee of board was set up to help manage cane poaching, which was at an all-time high. It went on to say NSC had instituted court proceedings against Kenya Sugar Factory in 2012 on matter of cane poaching, and NSC has not been able to pay farmers in good time due to low sales as a result of depressed sugar market. This is we have Butali Sugar Mills also. It says Kenya Sugar Board should come up, this is what Butali Sugar was saying, with regulations in respect to contractual obligations on the part of contracted farmers and respective millers. The creation of too many weighbridges had contributed to cane poaching. West Kenya Sugar Company pay farmers after seven days. Butali Sugar Company received funding from Kenya Sugar Board for construction of weighbridges and cane development. There was also submissions, finally, maybe I should read, from Kenya Sugar Board, which is now defunct, and we have also the current committee saying that we should re-establish the Kenya Sugar Board. And they were saying that, let me just go to the pertinent issues that they had raised here. KSB identified West Sugar Factory as the main sugar cane poacher in Western Kenya and received complaints from neighboring millers. Also, it identified Kenafric Industries as one of the manufacturers that repackages imported industrial sugar and locally manufactured branded sugar packages for sale as table sugar. We've still been having this issue as well, even currently. KCB issues licenses for importation, and the role of verifying quality, quantities, and values as specified in the KCB permits rest with KEBs, that is Kenya, KEBs and KRA, before the consignments are released into the market. So it says that KCB issued a license to import 10,000 metric tons of sugar in 2012 to Mumias Sugar Company, and it was unprocedural for the permit to have been issued by a third party, Dante's Peak Limited, since the permit was non-transferable. All right, these are just issues of regulations as well, but you get the main idea. And even now, we have even the board of sugar company. And the current also, although
poaching cannot be the main issue in the sugar. I mean,
there are other issues, but I'm just highlighting what is here.
Those are excuses, and Kenyans, we are very good at, faced with a big issue, we are very good at coming up with excuses. I would say that the most likely scenario for success would be to adopt the structure of the tea sector, so that you don't hear the issue of poaching, for example, between tea factories, and we have like 65 tea factories serving millions of smallholder tea farmers. You don't hear the question of poaching, but you hear coffee stocks being stolen. Yeah, you hear, the thing you're raising about. So there is a structural problem there, and I agree with Senator Bello that look, if you are not paying me for my cane, okay, you can say, oh, you helped me with some fertilizer, but if I have to wait for a year before you pay me for my cane. Why should I be delivering my cane to you? So it's not just, there's the Zoya, Mumias, and what have you. Those companies have a certain responsibility they're not living up to, which is perhaps leading to farmers opting to sell their cane elsewhere. But there are deeper questions about productivity, about the yield, about the quality or the content of the sucrose content of the cane that we grow, about how long it takes to mature before we can harvest it. And unless we solve those questions, there are governance questions of the government or publicly owned factories. And unless we solve those problems, I think, we were saying during the break about cost of production within each of the factories. So unless all those kinds of problems are resolved, poaching is...
All right, I think that if the government leases out these 5 factories the way they have suggested, it would be a positive thing. Particularly if, the debts will be written off and, and the millers, the lessors will be obliged to invest in upgrading or modernizing the mills. That is critical. The second aspect that is very critical is that introduction of this sugar development levy, which was scrapped in 2016, because it even with with the current situation, let me tell you, in areas like Busia, and not Busia, Mumias, the sugar, the sucrose content of sugar in that area is very good. It can compete with Mauritius and all those countries. Very good, very high quality. Muchangake is very good. So I think it's important that the government really revise by doing that, not any other arrangement of trying to pump $1 billion here and $1 billion there. That's not really. Those are
it's not rocket science. My mind goes straight to sugar, to milk sector. When we had this we had KICC.
KCC, not KI.
KCC.
Kenya Cooperative Creameries.
Yeah, they were very interesting. They used to tell us they make better milk than the cow. It was like, okay. And you see how the Fresher, how the Brookside, how the Tuzo, they all came, and that sector changed completely. In terms of farmers appreciate, like Fresher. I come from where we have a lot of people going to Fresher, but they get paid. They can take their milk. My maid also goes to down this side, Kenya Meat Commission. Yeah. You bring defense forces, because now they have been out, but you see changes. So what is so magic about the sugar industry?
All right, as winding up on
and the point I was making earlier on, and I will repeat it perhaps, is the whole thing I was sharing here, that I can't remember exactly when it was, but people were out to import maize. And we are told the maize is coming from Mexico. But in 12 hours, the maize was here by sea.
And maybe it came via Concordia.
The Concord.
The Concord, yeah.
And it was already in the high seas, in the Indian Ocean.
So governance. Okay, I wanted to raise the issue of classifying maybe the sugar as a food item. Because also one of the things that and the concerns were raised, since it's not classified as a food item, then it attracts the 16% VAT. Should that something maybe they should consider, or now that it's being privatized, we just leave it?
I think it should, because sugar is a key ingredient in many foods, and I think for some people, for many Kenyans, sugar is food. Because there are people who survive on tea only as food. I mean, you need sugar in milk, you need sugar in everything.
Like
in confectionaries.
He has to come to the show with this particular
mug of tea. Yes. So I think we should.
I'm not sure whether it's some whiskey or something. You never know. Not in the morning. You never know.
Yeah, because with the prices of sugar now what they are, and with 16% duty and IDFs and all those taxes, over 20% when you add all the levies and so forth, I think it's very important, because it's one of the fundamental foods that Kenyans are concerned about the cost of living is sugar. So I think it's important that the government looks
it's actually
at
one of the in the basket.
and in their countries like
Egypt
Egypt and their countries where they don't tax because they consider this a very essential commodity.
Or should it be separated from the industrial sugar?
Yes, sure.
From the table
Of
sugar.
course, industrial sugar is
so that
already
should be
even in terms of KEBS, it's classified differently. Yeah. So they're not under the same
it's a
tax
different
code.
commodity.
It's not the same code.
Okay. Now, we always talk about also the cost of power. And I was seeing from this particular report, or the divestiture, they're saying that Kenya's sugar industry has the potential to generate up to 120 megawatts of electricity for export to the national grid without major investment. However,
Yes.
it was only Mombasa Sugar that divested into energy production, and by then it was generating 38 megawatts, out of which 26 is exported to the national grid. If we align this sector, also we'll have exceedingly beneficial, cascading benefits that will come to the national grid when we concentrate on streamlining the sector itself.
Umia stood out in terms of the quantum of power they were producing and had a surplus to sell back to the grid. But nearly all sugar factories produce some electricity that they consume within the field. That means it saves how much they draw down from the grid. But that only happens when you allow these factories to face the market and say, how do we stay afloat? Where do we save costs? Where do we invest? As it cannot be managed centrally. And Umias did all of those things. They had, they produced power. They had excess steam, which they cooled down to water. They were producing some ethanol. They were doing all the right things that you could think could be done. But I think it's an industry that people in Kenya don't want to let work like that. It is a money-seeking, rent-seeking opportunity everywhere, and people are looking for how they can get into it and have their hands in. That's where the problems arise from. And I was going to make the comparison with Uganda. Maybe there may be some of that, but it seems to be less than ours, to the extent where they're still able to land their sugar in Kenya if they can, at lower cost than we're able to produce.
They are.
Yes.
But it's one of the major commercial countries importing sugar here. Uganda, yes. Yeah.
Okay, so let's just gravitate to other issues right now, where Kenya is staring at a record high external repayment expenses in the current year, underlined by growing dues to China. And we are given to understand that the July debt burden was partly on account of increased repayments to the Exim Bank of China, the financier of stage gauge railway and other projects, whose repayment are estimated at 101.93 billion shillings in the current year. Overall, the Treasury has budgeted 112.39 billion shillings towards repaying China's debt, which increased from 107.472 billion shillings towards repaying China's debt, which increased, I should say, from 107.42 billion shillings last fiscal year ended June 2023. Kenya usually pays China's lenders in 2 batches, in July and January every financial year. The rising debt obligation have raised jitters among international investors over Kenya's ability to refinance huge external repayments despite the government commitment to fiscal austerity. It may not be able to do enough to avoid a sovereign default over the next 12 months. External borrowing costs are prohibitive, according to analysts. And they say also the economics that, according to the books, they say that Kenya's economic outlook on June 13th was actually exacerbated by political pressures, and which are likely to limit the extent to which the government tightens its belt. Well, a mishmash of issues there, but you get the idea of what I'm trying to put across here. So the question is, are we likely to face a sovereign default in the next 12 months?
I think that probably would be a little pessimistic. I don't know, because hitting a default is a big deal, very, very big deal, and governments can play a very strict to avoid default. You can rope it and pay poll or whatever those things are called and so on. But I think the truth of the matter is that when the installments are due, there's normally a big scramble. I know some of this because in the 11th and 12th Parliament from 2013 to 2020, I was in committees in which you would get to know when those installments are coming. And you could see the scramble there was to put money together to pay the installments. Do you know these are done strictly and scientifically? If payment is due by midnight, literally, if a clock strikes after midnight, you are in default. So they made sure that didn't happen. But it was always a strain. And I personally have been crusading against the quantum of borrowing for some time. But I think the failure, I don't know if it was so much on excessive borrowing, we do padding also, which is a problem, as to lower growth than was expected. So then you really get into a fix because you're borrowing in anticipation of exaggerated growth levels, and then you don't realize it, so you don't have the money to be able to pay. But whether this will lead instantly, or rather within these 12 months, to a default, that would be a very deep analysis I haven't seen. They must have looked at what the outlook looks like, what the inflows will be, but I do not believe we are facing anything like that now. There's always a risk, but I don't think it's a probability. Or has low probability, I would say.
First of all, we have a presentation issue. In the way we present the annual budget, the principal repayment is not shown in the budget. And that's why you had some people asking the question, what is the true budget? Is it 3.7 trillion or is it 4.5 or so? Because the principal repayment is not shown in the annual appropriation or what we call the annual budget. So the true cash flow requirements of the government this year is 4.5 trillion. The cash flow requirement, because the principal repayments are not shown. Now, if you look at the debt repayment schedule, you will see that this year there is a peak in total debt service. I mean, meaning interest payments plus principal repayments. There's a very high figure this year. It peaks again in 2024. Why is it high this year or into next year? Part of it is the Euro bond and a couple of other loans that are due within the next 12 months. Now, on the cash flow management side, we in a sense we are lazy, so maybe how I can put it, because we wait until the bullet payment is due instead of having, if you will, like a sinking fund where we are paying kidogo so that on the date of the bullet payment, then the scramble that my colleague has spoken about is not there. Is there probability of default? There is. Is it very high? I don't think it is as high perhaps as some rating agencies have projected, but it is there. And what I would say is that it's not, we should not like pretend like it's something new. Going back the last 3 years, both the National Treasury and her partner IMF have been writing a report to show that we are a high risk of debt distress. Now, what is debt distress? It's like this. We are rolling over debt at higher and higher cost. If you look at last week's Treasury auctions, the week before, even this week, what you will see, the monies that government will raise from the Treasury bill and bond auction, part of it will go to roll over. Yeah? So we are paying off earlier government securities. But those government securities were slightly cheaper than the ones we are issuing now because interest rates are very high. And that's what is debt distress. And we are already in it. Now, the question of at what point will we go into default? I think when debt service gets to perhaps around 65%, of total revenue you can most likely expect. We are heading dangerously in that direction, but as my colleague has said, a government can do a number of things.
10 trillion. That's on the higher side, isn't it?
I mean, we
the total debt stock.
total debt stock, and it would not of itself be a problem, except that it is at that level, and it's also when you have a very high interest rate regime. So going back to what's happening in the securities
and even
market.
there is the issue of the currency fluctuation, the dollar. So
Well,
if I was
absolutely.
to pay $1 million about a year ago, now I'm almost paying 1.5.
Oh, absolutely.
That has affected in it. But my view has been this, and I know you like a lot it on Saturdays actually. I really read newspapers, especially feeding the Sudoku and the crossword. But I do read what you write.
I'm encouraged. Thank you, Prof.
I don't read the standard, so I really don't read what you do. But
Sorry?
I really
did
read
you
the
say?
standard.
So do you want to repeat that?
Do you want to repeat that again?
Out of this
You know,
program, yes.
no. But Gituro Wanaina, how can you be in our premises and then you say such a statement? I'm taking special umbrage with that.
Withdraw and apologize.
Withdraw and apologize.
I behave like a bit
Withdraw
yesterday.
No, I'm really
If it's hurting the
flummoxed,
institution, I
so
will
to speak.
withdraw.
Yeah, no.
Withdraw and apologize.
You are in our establishment and then you declare you don't read our products. How?
We all write in the standard, so you should be reading the standard.
That's what I'm saying. And I'll just tell me the day you do, I'll be reading it. I was brought up in an area where you are an honest person. Integrity will take you wherever you want. So if I can't tell you I read it.
No, integrity is
Which one
good.
did you read?
Sorry?
Which newspaper do you read?
Do you read?
Nation. Hopefully not Nation. Anyway.
What are you talking about? It can become physical.
No. Anyway, back to debt.
Yes. And my thinking has been this. Even if I have a loan, for example, with Equity Bank or KCB, and I find that I don't have that capacity to repay, I'll go and talk to that bank. I'm paying. But when I was in school, I was told when you do all that net present value or internal rate of return, there's something called T. Time. So give me more time. But I'll pay you. My thought has been, it's time that the highest office in this country stepped and go to this, like China. Have very candid discussions. I probably would have pushed myself to this meeting.
For the BRICS.
Yes. Go to the BRICS, even if you're an observer. But you have an agenda at the end of the day, which I think, we should find a lady in this. These are all men, and these are all men. We should find a lady in the BRICS.
Yes.
Bilo,
But
on it.
my point is, there is opportunity, and we are getting there. Debt distress. Now, that kicks
We
in.
are in debt distress.
The problem
The
we
question
have-
of, are we going to go into default?
Absolutely. The problem we get, we go the Ghana way.
So-
Food is pressing us. Food is pressing us. So we had that. So my understanding, why can't we renegotiate the repayments we are doing? Stretches over time as opposed to the kind of time we have. I do remember when on my other life, when the government used to borrow, and I started educated here by Derito, we used to peg their own on SDR, special drawing rights, which were like not responsive to the currency changes. Is that an avenue? Is this something we can look at when you borrow? Or even take insurance, not insurance really, I don't know, take insurance when you get this kind of loans.
You see, I mean, and we should, that's my colleague gets it. Look, we already, by own admission, are in debt distress.
Right.
Then, by our own decision making as a nation, so the regime has decided, look, we are going to borrow even more. So, for instance, this year, the budget deficit is 720 billion. That is new borrowing. You have seen last week the Treasury saying since we can see the domestic market is reacting in a certain way, the domestic market is demanding 17%, 18% interest, we are now not going to borrow as much from the domestic. We are going to increase what we wanted to borrow from the external. Of course, the market are still skeptical because even externally interest rates are high. Your credit rating has just been downgraded. So it's not like you're going to go and get cheaper money.
Thank you.
Yeah, so it is, if we go in this the trajectory, the probability of default rises by the day.
By the day. So within the next 12 months, as is being put here by the analysts,
my view, the analysts are correct. It increases the probability. And what should government do? Government should dial back on this growth in borrowing. If we continue in the trajectory.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you. You want to say something?
Yeah, just saying that it's a warning in terms of direction, but I don't think it's correct in terms of probability of that outcome. But you're heading the wrong. The risk that you'll have to sacrifice too much just to pay to meet your debt installments.
Right.
But so, in the likelihood of a default, if we are headed there, God forbid, what sort of aspect are we looking at?
My view is, of course, we read about what's happening. Moody has been downgrading our credit rating. We are now in the same league with some of those countries, Angola's and some of the poor countries so our situation is not very good in that. But if you look at it from another perspective, that our economy is now under IMF management, if you will. We are under administration. The IMF...
We are on a receivership.
IMF boss was here.
We just have friends.
IMF boss was here a few months ago, I remember in May, June, and she was categorical. She was asked this question: is Kenya going to default? And she said, absolutely not going to happen in a million years, because they said we will not, because they're the ones who are now calling the shots. They want to get into a situation where they'll bail these guys out, they don't get into a default. This is, and it's clear, this is why Kenya does not look to the West anymore. Have you seen our boss mention anything about China the last 12 months since he came to power? You can't. What China has become contraband. It's the focus is IMF. That's where we are. So I don't think the risk of default is there one way or the other. We will. If you look at her comments on the June 24 next year's Eurobond, she rubbish. She said Kenya is going to pay it. What's the big deal? Take another loan and pay.
Yeah.
And so I think we have gone into a debt trap, and in that station you just need to borrow and pay again that debt. Borrow another one and pay another debt. This is where we are. We are in a debt trap. But the concern we have, all of us, I think, on this table has been the continuous increase or the increase in borrowing. The appetite by this government is more than even the last administration. I'm telling you, we're going to see it. By the end of the 5 years of this, if they continue on this trajectory, Uhuru will become a saint.
I know we're running out, but look, IMF boss cannot publicly admit, cannot say, we think Kenya is going to default. She can't say do that. Failed, but you can observe her behavior or the behavior of IMF. Yeah. If you look at this contentious Finance Act, part of it is conditionality of IMF that you must really tax as much as you can to raise whatever. Now, why are credit rating agencies downgrading? They are looking at the numbers.
But should we also be taking blow by blow what they're telling us, the credit agencies? Because there have been queries as well regarding the...
We should look at the numbers ourselves. We should look at the numbers ourselves. Yes, the question is this sluggish economy, is it likely to produce 2.9 trillion in taxes, which is what is in the budget? Yeah. Most likely not. So this 720 billion deficit is likely a trillion or more than a trillion shilling deficit, because you are unlikely in this kind of sluggish economy to raise what you have projected there. Yeah. And you see this in the whatever in counties, for example, where you know that sometimes counties overestimate own source revenue in order to actually have a bigger budget, which then leads to pending bills. And this is exactly what the national government.
This is the first time I have Dedi to talk about IMF in who they are. And thank you very much for that.
No, I have never hidden the fact. Look, I have never hidden the fact.
ICU,
I have said it repeatedly.
That's what they are set up to do.
Is an ICU. So you should not be harsh on them. They are doing their work. If you see yourself going for an IMF program, it's because your economy is not functioning.
But are we at risk of default? I don't think we are. I think it's always, when the fundamentals are not moving the same direction, you can only say, yes, if we continue like this, we could be at risk of default. But I do not think that we are. You mentioned IMF presence in town, the possibilities of borrowing from, what do you call it, Rob Peter, PayPal, just to pay to meet the installments. That would be serious economic consequence. But default, I do not think we are likely.
Thank you.
To get anywhere near that.
All right, let's just move on, because I can see we have remaining with a few minutes with also developments that we had. There was this splash that we had on the front page of the Business Daily as well, and this was regarding the government to government, not today's, but just earlier this week on Monday, to step back from Gulf fuel import scheme. It says still on IMF, or you're talking about IMF is fearing for us. It's fearing for us. They say this deal exposes taxpayers to currency risk. Obligation estimated at 4 billion shillings by, that is 572 billion shillings. No, $4 billion, that is 572 billion shillings by September.
I think I go fast.
Sure.
Then probably my colleague, and then we let government have the last one. Look, we have said on this panel many times that this G2G deal was a scheme to make money. And here is the reasoning. I mean, to make money for certain individuals. Now, you say, okay, you have been given 6 months, so you are issuing letters of credit, and that buys you 6 months lead time, but you still will have to pay for the oil. And you're not going to pay for it in Kenya shillings. That was really just stories. You are going to have to pay in dollars. Now, if you are the commercial bank that has issued this letter of credit, you have to immediately begin buying the dollars that you're going to use to pay in those 6 months' time. That's why the demand for dollars did not really go down. Okay? And it could not have gone down, because unless you are an incompetent banker, if you are the one who has issued that LC, you have to be asking yourself, in those 180 days, where is the pile of dollars that you are going to use to settle this LC? So they had to begin to accumulate, Now, but what happened to the premium that the importer gets? Because remember, this open tender thing where one importer brings all the oil, then the rest of us, the rest of the other companies, take from that consignment. That's what has been going on. The importer gets a premium. That premium went up 100%, 150%, because that is where the accommodation for this political elite is. Now, what the IMF is talking about, the exchange rate is deteriorating. Who is the carrier of that risk? Obviously, either you will pass it on to the consumer, therefore the pump price, and also the cost of financing those 6 months, because that LC is not for free. Who is going? All these costs are loaded onto the consumer, and that is why you saw government backpedaling last week, the week before, and saying, hey, the way pump prices have gone, we better do now what they're calling price stabilization. This deal was always a bad deal for Kenyans, and a scheme for connected elite to make some money.
Be looking. Government, they say, will be last to speak.
No. Government.
I know.
It's just a convenient.
I know. Thank you, Prof.
I think we have, I agree with Indiritu, we have discussed this thing from the outset. I have been very clear that this is a rent-seeking adventure, really. And I think it has paid them off. People have been paid off. And I mean, if you know what's going on in this industry, that, you know, the deal was done and they made their money, and now, but the Kenyans, the whole idea of hedging against, you know, the dollar or getting the price discount from the Gulf countries and all those things were hawks. It didn't work. And I think those people who crafted this thing should be held to account. I think these are the kind of things I expect members of parliament to be annoyed about, not some fellows traveling economy class, sports and whatever, harassing that poor innocent, that poor MP. These are the guys they need to skin alive, the Ministry of Energy. You go and take Kenyans on a wild goose chase. We had a very efficient system of OTS that was working. Government had no role. You know, marketers were importing the oil and selling to Kenyans. If there was a price problem, the government was doing whatever they were calling price stabilization or subsidy, which depends on who you talk to. And so now you come with a deal to make money, and we end up in a situation where I'm telling you, when these accounts are done, whatever time it will be done, you will see we're going to end up with a huge loss to the exchequer. So I think it's good that they're thinking about it. I think they should scrap it like yesterday.
But also we had the development here that Treasury is defending that deal. If you,
what do you expect them to do? This is a cash cow.
Ndugu maintains that the letters of credit. Let's just say what they have to say. The letters of credit in the deal are a good business model, in quotes, that global and local banks use, and they say that this was in response to that particular headline, that the letter of credit in deals are a good business model used by both international and local banks. There is no risk in finance. The government is satisfied with the progress of the arrangement that is G2G deal, which has created a relatively stable forex environment and enhanced the supply of petroleum products. The International Monetary Fund had raised this concern, as was expected, as we said here, that Kenya is exposed should palm prices not be adjusted to fully pass. Bilo, you had finished?
Government, rent seekers.
No. Can we hear from government, because we need to ask a question?
I thought Prof was going to go before you, but I don't mind.
Not government, I'm academia, but I'll go for it. And
around this comment, rent seekers do not say, they will not go on a headline or on a television show like this one and say we are rent seeking. They will come with very sugar-coated language to tell you it's a good thing. You have to look at the numbers. Yes, international trade uses letters of credit, but that letter of credit comes at a cost. That's the question we're asking Domu.
But
we're not saying that LCs are a bad thing. We are asking, who is footing the cost of the LC? The shilling is deteriorating against the dollar. Who is footing that cost? That is what the IMF is asking, that what Kenyans are asking. Not this sugar-coated language. But I yield the floor to government side.
To academia.
To the government side. Academia and the
government and their consultants.
It's publicly funded academia.
It's a very interesting. Well, I mean, I think I need to go to Parliament the next 5 years, so I have been there. I mean, yes. My take it's also a bad deal, and it's very interesting. Mugabe one time said, "Why fix it when it's not broken?" The way we are doing it I think, was right. And where we are headed, and I want to have a quote here. There is this lady called Maya Gore, is an American author, dancer, poet. You can think about in the.
Maya Angelou, she passed on.
Yeah, and it says, what you are supposed to do when you don't like a thing is change it. If you can't change it, change the way you think about it. Otherwise, shut up.
It's a nice one.
Thank you. So let's go back to the streets. I think that's the import of what you're saying.
And I think the point I'm saying here is the government feels that there's something we can't. Let's think about it differently. And it's good to admit we goofed. There's a mistake here. How can we do it differently? And my thought is, let's stop what do you call chest thumping?
Chest thumping, yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of that. But let's step back. That's how we can do it differently.
It was not a goof.
I think
It is a rent-seeking, calculated scheme.
I have a different.
It's not a goof.
It's not a goof.
It is well calculated.
It's a calculated goof. It is a calculated rent-seeking. Government has
my
a
time
fault.
should come now.
Yes.
Right? It's possible to have any kind of interpretation as to what it was intended for, what it looked like, what it smelled like. As a suspicion, what I believe was the main aim of that transaction was to get the issue off the headline. We have no forex, we shall be unable to import oil, and so you come up and say we have an arrangement which will have a delayed commitment. It was not going to be free, a delayed commitment. So it gets the issue of not having the forex and not being able to import oil for that period is taken off the headlines. It's pushed, I think is it 6 months or is it?
6 months.
6 months, yes. And around this table, we discussed this matter at the time. If I remember roughly speaking, Bill was saying that we are only postponing the pain. So we anticipated analytically that this could happen. But what advantage did it have? It took it off the headlines. It's not been on the headlines for some time. Now, if in that process, like every change, like every transaction, who loses, who gains, you can do that analysis for any transaction. And you might find that, somebody has gained. You can say, it was intended for this person to gain, or maybe for this person to lose. Sometimes it can also be a target. I don't believe that the whole transaction was, its aim was for rent seeking, but it may have had opportunities for rent seeking. Yeah, could have. But the primary objective of it was to get this issue off the headlines, to allow government to think about other things, as this is delayed by 6 months. A very important delay. 6 months is a long time. That I think is the...
All right.
I think he's talking like a government.
Wait.
But is it factual though?
No. You see, the government, which is characteristics of this particular administration, they have given different reasons for this thing. Initially, they said cheap fuel. We're getting cheaper fuel. And then they moved on and said, no, the CS went live on TV, even in Parliament, and said, it's about forex stabilization. We will getting dollars, and that's how some CS said it will come to 80, the boss said it will come to 120, and it was about forex. All didn't work. We didn't get cheap fuel, the forex thing didn't work, and then later we got this story that, there was a problem, on the deal, and they are renegotiating it again afresh. But the bottom line is, those LCs, which I think are done through our loan KCBs and so forth to those three companies, at the end of the day, there's a forex exposure, because the LCs are denominated in dollars to those companies. The payment by the marketers here for the oil is in shillings. So there was an exposure on forex. The question was, and this came on a headline by the CS Energy, I remember at the time, that he said the exchange risk or loss arising on this thing will be borne by the taxpayer. And this is the point IMF is speaking. So forget about what Treasury is saying. The reality is there is an exposure.
There is an exposure.
And the reason,
and that's the point I was bringing earlier on. There are opportunities to really protect that. The same narrative we have Kenya Airways. They go to this, oil business goes up, but the opportunity to protect yourself.
Ask yourself, why was there a reversal of policy by this regime last week, where IPRA announced what they are calling price stabilization?
Subsidy.
And it is actually fuel subsidy. Why? Because these costs have now kicked in. And they wrote, which is uncharacteristic, they wrote a 12-page effort to explain what they were doing.
They didn't say by how much they stabilized.
But
20 shillings, 10 shillings, that, they didn't tell us that.
But the whole point is that now these costs have kicked in. But to my colleague, the reason we, by analysis, conclude it was always a rent-kicking scheme, the players around the table talking about it, saying, oh, it's about Forex, they know better. Okay? Of course they know better. CS Treasury has been in his racket for a long, I mean, he was central bank governor, for heaven's sake.
Not in the racket.
Not racket, but what I mean is in government. So he knows exactly.
He said racket, so don't change
so
it.
I changed it.
He has withdrawn.
The point I'm making is that all the players around the table have been in government for a long time. They have been in financial markets for a long time. All these things were not news to them. And as the senator is saying, it was. They kept shifting the reasons why they're doing the transactions. You cannot but conclude it was always designed for rent seeking.
You see, you see, when you are doing the open tender system that the ministry was running, if you look at the weighted average premium, those tenders, the government was, you know, the tenders, on those who win the tenders were charging. Let me tell you, the premium on the G to G on this 6 months was twice the amount of premium that was being charged on the open tender.
But what are
because this thing was not G to G to government. It was to trading companies like Aramco and Adnoc and so forth. These are companies that are in business. They were charging, because of that delay in the repayment and LCs and all that, their premium, and I have the figures. And I mean, the figures were almost double.
Yeah, but does that happen generally when you get someone to help you delay payment? You're prepared to pay, but not now.
The question of cheaper
is my special day, and I wanted to share this one.
It's a special day, but I need to wind up now.
40 years of marriage.
40 years of marriage.
Only.
Oh, we should have come up. Oh, okay. Congratulations.
Thank you. And all the
Congratulations.
best.
Well done.
Thanks to Madam.
Thanks to Madam. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thanks to you to Madam for taking good care of Professor Gituro Wadaina.
Yeah.
We want to thank you so much. Happy anniversary.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, gentlemen, we need to wind up. I want to thank you for your input this morning. I think I want to give each of you, time to wind up because of time, so we can pick up next week. Thank you. And we shall be looking at a raft of other issues as well, where we have MPs also who are fighting the loss of power in privatization bill. They're saying that they're rejecting a section of a bill that grants the Treasury unchecked powers to sell parastatus without the approval of Parliament. I think we've had that discussion here before.
Yes.
Been watching Sokoni. Thank you very much for your valid campaign.